The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. Chapter 1. Miss Cackle's Academy for Witches stood atop a high mountain, surrounded by a pine forest. It looked more like a prison than a school, with its gloomy grey walls and turrets. Sometimes you could see the pupils on their broomsticks, flitting like bats above the playground wall, but usually the place was half hidden in the mist, so that if you had glanced up at the mountain, you probably would not have noticed that there was a building there at all. Everything about the school was dark and shadowy. There were long, narrow corridors and winding staircases, and of course there were the girls themselves, dressed in black gym slips, black stockings, black hobnailed boots, grey shirts, and black and grey ties. Even their summer dresses were black and grey checked. The only touches of colour were the sashes around their gym slips, a different colour for each house, and the school badge, which was a black cat sitting on a yellow moon. For special occasions, such as prize-giving or Halloween, there was another uniform consisting of a long robe, one with a tall pointed hat, but as these were black too, it really didn't make much of a change. There were so many rules and exams every week. Mildred Hubble was in her first year at school. She was one of those people who always seemed to be in trouble. She didn't exactly mean to break the rules and annoy teachers, but things just seemed to happen whenever she was around. You could rely on Mildred to have her hat on back to front, or her bootlaces trailing on the floor. She couldn't walk from one end of a corridor to the other without someone yelling at her, and nearly every night she was writing lines or being kept in, not that there was anywhere to go if you were allowed out. Anyway, she had lots of friends, even if they did keep their distance in the potion laboratory, and her best friend Maud stayed loyally by her throughout everything, however hair-raising. They made a funny pair, for Mildred was tall and thin, with long plaits, which she often chewed absent-mindedly, another thing she was told off about, while Maud was short and tubby, with round glasses, and wore her hair in bunches. On the first day of the academy, each pupil was given a broomstick and taught to ride it, which takes quite a long time, and it isn't nearly as easy as it looks. Halfway through the first term, they were each presented with a black kitten, which they trained to ride the broomsticks. The cats weren't for any practical purpose, except to keep tradition going. Some schools present owls instead, but it's just a matter of taste. Miss Cackle was a very traditional headmistress, who did not believe in any new-fangled nonsense, and trained her young witches to keep up with all the customs that had been taught in her young day. At the end of the first year, each pupil received a copy of the popular Book of Spells, a 3-inch thick volume, bound in black leather. This was not really to be used, as they already had a paperback editions for the classroom, but like the cats, it was another piece of tradition. Apart from the yearly prize-giving, there were no more presentations until the 5th and final year, when most pupils were awarded the Witch's Hire certificate. It did not seem likely that Mildred would even get that far. After only 2 days at the school, she crashed her broomstick into the yard wall, breaking the broomstick in half and bending her hat. She mended the stick with glue and sticky tape. Unfortunately, it still flew, though there was an ugly bundle where the ends joined, and sometimes it was rather difficult to control. The story really begins halfway through Mildred's first term, on the night before the presentation of the kittens. It was almost midnight, and the school was in darkness, except for one narrow window lit softly by the glow of a candle. This was Mildred's room, where she was sitting in bed wearing a pair of black and grey striped pajamas, and dropping off to sleep every few minutes. Maud was curled up on the end of the bed, enveloped in a grey flannel nightdress and a black woolen shawl. Each pupil had the same type of room, very simple, with a wardrobe, iron bedstand, table and chair, and a slit window like the ones used by archers in the castles of long ago. There was a picture rail along the bare walls from which hung a sampler embroidered with a quotation from the Book of Spells, and also during the day several bats. Mildred had 3 bats in her room, little furry ones, which were very friendly. She was fond of animals, and was looking forward to the next day when she would have a kitten of her own. "What are you going to call yours, Maud?" asked Mildred sleepily. "Midnight," said Maud. "I think it sounds dramatic." "I'm worried about the whole thing," Mildred confessed, chewing the end of her plait. "I'm sure I'll do something dreadful. like treading on its tail, or else it'll take one look at me and leap out the window. Something's bound to go wrong." "Don't be silly," said Maud. "You know you have a way with animals. And as for treading on its tail, it won't even be on the floor. Miss Cackle hands it to you, and that's all there is to it. So there's nothing to worry about, is there?" Before Mildred had time to reply, the door crashed open to reveal their form mistress, Miss Hardbroom, standing in the doorway wrapped in a black dressing gown, a lantern in her hand. She was tall, a terrifying lady, with sharp, bony face, black hair, scragged back in a tight knot that her forehead looked quite stretched. "Rather late to be up, isn't it, girls?" she inquired, nastily. The girls, who had leapt into each other's arms when the door burst open, drew apart and fixed their eyes on the floor. "Of course, if we don't want to be included in the presentation tomorrow, we are certainly going about it the right way," Miss Hardbroom continued icily. "Yes, Miss Hardbroom," chorused the girls miserably. Miss Hardbroom glared meaningfully at Mildred's candle and swept out the corridor with Maud in front of her. Mildred hastily blew out the candle and dived under the bedclothes. But she could not get to sleep. Outside the window, she could hear the owls hooting, and somewhere in the school a door had been left open and was creaking backwards and forwards into the wind. To tell you the truth, Mildred was afraid of the dark. But don't tell anyone. I mean, whoever heard of a witch who was scared of the dark? Chapter 2. The presentation took place in the great hall, a huge stone room with rows of wooden benches, a raised platform at one end, and shields and portraits all the way round the walls. The whole school had assembled, and Miss Cackle and Miss Hardbroom stood behind a table on the platform. On the table was a large wicker basket, from which came new mews and squeaks. First off, everyone sang the school song, which went like this: "Onward, ever striving, onward proudly, on our brooms we fly, straight and true above the treetop shadows of the moonlit sky. Near a day will pass before us when we have not tried our best, kept our cauldrons bubbling nicely, cast our spells and charms with zest. Full of joy we mix our potions, working by each other's side. When our days at school are over, let us think of them with pride." It was the usual type of school song, full of pride, joy, and striving. Mildred had never yet mixed a potion with joy, nor flown her broomstick with pride. She was usually too busy trying to keep upright. Anyway, when they had finished droning the last verse, Miss Cackle rang her little silver bell on the table, and the girls marched up in single file to receive their kittens. Mildred was the last of all, and when she reached the table, Miss Cackle pulled out the basket, not a sleek black kitten like all the others, but a little tabby with white paws and short fur that looked as if it had been out all night in a gale. "We ran out of black ones," explained Miss Cackle with a pleasant grin. Miss Hardbroom smiled too, but nastily. After the ceremony, everybody rushed to see Mildred's kitten. "I think H.B. had a hand in this somewhere," said Maud, darkly. H.B. was their nickname for Miss Hardbroom. "I must admit, it does look a bit dim, doesn't it?" said Mildred, scratching the tabby kitten's forehead. "But I don't really mind. I'll just have to think of another name. I was going to call it Sooty. Let's take them down to the playground and see what they make of a broomstick riding." Almost all the first-year witches were in the yard trying to persuade their puzzled kittens to sit on their broomsticks. Several were already clinging on by their claw, and one kitten, belonging to a rather smug young witch named Ethel, was sitting bolt upright, cleaning its paws as if it had been broomstick riding all its life. Riding broomstick was no easy matter. As I have mentioned before, first you ordered the stick to hover, and it hovered lengthways above the ground. Then you sat on it, gave it a sharp tap, and away you flew. Once in the air, you could make the stick do almost anything by saying right, left, stop, down a bit, and so on. The difficult part was balancing, for if you leaned too far to one side, you could easily overbalance, in which case you would either fall off or find yourself hanging upside down, and then you would have to hold on with your skirt over your head until a friend came to your rescue. It had taken Mildred several weeks of falling off and crashing before she could ride the broomstick reasonably well, and it looked as though her kitten was going to have the same trouble. When she put it on the end of the stick, it just fell off without even trying to hold on. After many attempts, Mildred picked up her kitten and gave it a shake. "Listen," she said severely. "I think I shall have to call you stupid. You don't even try and hold on. Everybody else is all right. Look at all your friends." The kitten gazed at her sadly and licked her nose with a rough tongue. "Oh, come on," said Mildred, softening her voice. "I'm not really angry with you. Let's try again." And she put the kitten back on the broomstick, from which it fell with a thud. Maud was having better luck. Her kitten was hanging on grimly, upside down. "Oh, well," laughed Maud. "It's a start." "Mine's useless," said Mildred, sitting on the broomstick for a rest. "Never mind," Maud said. "Think how hard it must be for them to hang on by the claws." An idea flashed into Mildred's head, and she dived into the school, leaving her kitten chasing a leaf along the ground, and the broomstick still patiently hovering. She came out carrying her satchel, which she hooked over the end of the broom, and then bundled the kitten to it. The kitten's astounded face peeped out of the bag as Mildred flew delightedly round the yard. "Look, Maud!" she called from 10 feet up in the air. "That's cheating," said Maud, looking at the satchel. Mildred flew back and landed on the ground laughing. "I don't think HB will approve," said Maud doubtfully. "Quite right, Maud," an icy voice behind them said. "Mildred, my dear, possibly it would be even easier with handlebars and a saddle." Mildred blushed. "I'm sorry, Miss Hardbroom," she muttered. "It doesn't balance very well. My kitten's so I thought perhaps—" Her voice trailed away under Miss Hardbroom's stony glare, and Mildred unhooked her satchel and turned the bewildered kitten on the ground. "Girls," Miss Hardbroom clapped her hands, "I would like to remind you that there is a potion test tomorrow morning. That is all." So saying, she disappeared, literally. "I wish I could do that," whispered Maud, looking at the places where the form headmistress had been standing. "You're never quite sure where she's gone or not." "Right again, Maud," came Miss Hardbroom's voice from nowhere. Maud gulped and hurried back to her kitten. Chapter 3. Do you remember I told you about a certain young witch named Ethel, who had succeeded in teaching her kitten from the very first try? Ethel was one of those lucky people for whom everything goes right. She was always on top of the class, and her spells always worked, and Miss Hardbroom never made any icy remarks to her. Because of this, Ethel was often rather bossy with the other girls. On this occasion, she had overheard the whole of Mildred's encounter with Miss Hardbroom, and couldn't resist being nasty about it. "I think Miss Cackle gave you that cat on purpose," Ethel sneered. "You're both as bad as each other." "Oh, be quiet," said Mildred, trying to keep her temper. "Anyway, it's not a bad cat. It'll learn in time." "Like you did," Ethel went on. "Wasn't it last week that you crashed into the dustbins?" "Look, Ethel," Mildred said, "you'd better be quiet, because if you don't, I shall have to turn you into a frog, and I don't want to do that." Ethel gave a shriek of laughter. "That's really funny," she crowed. "You don't even know the beginner's spells, let alone ones like that." Mildred blushed and looked very miserable. "Go on, then," cried Ethel. "Go on, then if you're so clever, turn me into a frog. I'm waiting." It just so happened that Mildred did have an idea of the spell. She had been reading about it in the library. By now, everyone had crowded around, waiting to see what would happen, and Ethel was still jeering. It was unbearable. Mildred muttered the spell under her breath, and Ethel vanished, and in her place stood a small, pink and grey pig. Cries and shouts went into the air. "Oh, no! That's torn it! You've done it now, Mildred!" Mildred was horrified. "Oh, Ethel," she said, "I'm sorry, but you did ask for it." The pig looked furious. "You beast, Mildred Hubble," it grunted. "Change me back." At that moment, Miss Hardbroom suddenly appeared in the middle of the yard. "Where is Ethel Hallow?" she asked. "Miss Bat would like to see her about extra chanting lessons." Her sharp gaze fell on the small pig which was grunting softly at her feet. "What is this animal doing in the yard?" she asked coldly. Everyone looked at Mildred. "I let it in, Miss Hardbroom," Mildred said hesitantly. "Well, you can't just let it out again, please," said Miss Hardbroom. "Oh, I can't do that," gasped the unhappy Mildred. "I mean, Couldn't I keep it as a pet? I think you have quite enough trouble coping with yourself and that kitten, without adding a pig to your worries, Miss Hardbroom replied, staring at the tabby kitten, which was now peering around Mildred's ankles. Let it out at once. Now where is Ethel? Mildred bent down. Ethel, dear, she whispered coaxingly in the pig's ear, will you go out when I tell you to? Please, Ethel. I'll let you in again straight away afterwards. Pleading with people like Ethel never works. It only makes them feel their power. I won't go, bellowed the pig. Miss Hardbroom, I am Ethel. Mildred Hubble turned me into a pig. Nothing ever surprised Miss Hardbroom. Even this startling piece of news only caused her to raise one slanting eyebrow. Well, Mildred, she said, I'm glad to know that you have at least learned one thing since you came here. However, as you have noticed in the Witch's Code, Rule number 7, paragraph 2, it is not customary to practice your tricks on your fellows. Please remove the spell at once. I'm afraid I don't know how to, Mildred confessed, in a very small voice. Miss Hardbroom stared at her for a few moments. Then you'd better go look it up in the library, she said wearily. Take Ethel with you, and on the way drop in and tell Miss Bat why Ethel will be late. Mildred picked up her kitten and hurried inside, followed by the pig. Fortunately, Miss Bat was not in her room, but it was most embarrassing going into the library. Ethel was grunting loudly on purpose, and everyone stared, so much that Mildred could have crawled under a table. Hurry up, moaned the pig. Oh, stop going on, said Mildred as she flicked hastily through the huge spellbook. It's all your fault anyway. You actually asked me to do it. I don't see why you're complaining. I said frog, not pig, said Ethel pettily. You couldn't even do that right. Mildred ignored the grunting Ethel and kept looking in the book. It took her half an hour to find the right spell, and soon after that Ethel was her horrible self again. The people in the library were almost surprised to see the pig suddenly change into a furious-looking Ethel. Now, don't be angry, Ethel, Mildred said softly. Remember, silence in the library at all times. And she rushed into the corridor. Wasn't that awful, Cat? She said to the kitten, which was curled up inside her cardigan. I think I'd better put you in my room, and then go and revise for potion test. Don't tease the bats, will you? Chapter 4. It was the morning of the potions test, and the girls were filing into the potion lab, each hoping she had learned the right spell, except for Ethel, who knew everything and never worried about such matters. Come on, girls, to a cauldron, barked Miss Hardbroom. Today we shall make a laughter potion. No textbooks to be used. Put away that book this instant. Mildred, work quietly, and when you have finished, you may take a small dip of the mixture and make sure it is correctly made. You may begin. Maud and Mildred were sharing a cauldron, of course, but unfortunately neither of them had learned that particular spell. I think I can remember it vaguely, whispered Maud. Bits of it, anyway. She began to sort through the ingredients which had been laid out on the workbench. When everything was stirred together in the cauldron, the bubbling liquid was bright pink. Mildred stared at it doubtfully. I'm sure it should have been green, she said. In fact, I'm sure we should have put in a handful of pondweed gathered at midnight. Are you sure? Asked Maud. Yes, replied Mildred. Not very definitely. Absolutely sure, Maud asked again. You know what happened last time? I'm quite sure, insisted Mildred. Anyway, there's a handful of pondweed laid out on the bench. I'm positive we're supposed to put it in. Oh, all right, said Maud. Go on then. It can't do any harm. Mildred grabbed the pondweed and dropped into the mixture. They took turns stirring for a few minutes until it began to turn a dark green. What a horrid colour, said Maud. Are you ready, girls? Asked Miss Hardbroom, rapping on her desk. You should have been ready minutes ago. A laughter potion should be made quickly for use in an emergency. Ethel, who was working on the bench in front of Mildred, who stood up on tiptoe to sneak a look at the colour of Ethel's potion. To her horror, it was a bright pink. Oh no, Mildred thought, with a sinking feeling. I wonder what potion we've made. Miss Hardbroom banged on her desk again. We shall now test the potion, she commanded. Not too much, please. We don't want anyone hysterical. Each pupil took a test tube full of liquid and drank the bottle. At once shrieks of laughter rang through the room, especially from Ethel's bench, where they had made the best potion of all, and they were laughing so much that tears rolled down their cheeks. The only two girls who weren't laughing were Mildred and Maud. Oh dear, said Maud. I feel most peculiar. Why are you laughing, Mill? I hate to tell you, confessed Mildred. I think But before she had time to say any more, the two girls had disappeared. "Cauldron number 2?" snapped Miss Hardbroom. "You seem to have made the wrong spell." "It was my fault," said Mildred's voice from somewhere behind the cauldron. "That I don't doubt," Miss Hardbroom said sourly. "You'd better sit down until you reappear, and then, Mildred, perhaps a trip to Miss Cackle's office would do you some good. Can you explain why I sent you?" Everyone had left the room by the time the two witches finally began to reappear. It was a very slow process. The first, the head, and then the rest of the body, becoming gradually visible. "I'm sorry," said Mildred's head and shoulders. "That's all right," said Maud's head. "I just wish you'd think a bit more. We had the right potion to start with." "Sorry," humbled Mildred again. Then she began to laugh. "Hey, Maud, you do look funny with your head showing." At once they began to laugh, and they were soon best friends again. "I suppose we'd better go and see old Cackle now," said Mildred, when she had completely reappeared. "I'll come with you to the door," offered Maud. Miss Cackle was very small and very fat, with short grey hair and green horn-rimmed glasses, which she usually wore pushed up on the top of her head. She was the exact opposite of Miss Hardbroom, being absent-minded in appearance and rather gentle by nature. The girls were not in the least bit afraid of her, whereas Miss Hardbroom could reduce any of them to a miserable heap with just one word. Miss Cackle used different technique. By always being friendly and pleased to see a pupil in her office, she made them feel embarrassed, as if they had something unpleasant to tell her, as Mildred always had. Mildred knocked on Miss Cackle's door, hoping she wouldn't be about. She wasn't. "Come in," called the familiar voice from inside. Mildred opened the door and went in. Miss Cackle's glasses were on her nose, for once, was bustily writing in a huge register. She looked up and peered over her spectacles. "Ah, Mildred," she said pleasantly. "Come in, sit down, while I finish filling up for this register." Mildred closed the door and sat by Miss Cackle's desk. "I wish she wasn't so pleased to see me," she thought. Miss Cackle slammed the register shut and pushed her glasses back on top of her head. "Now, Mildred, what can I do for you?" Mildred twisted her fingers together. "Well, actually, Miss Cackle," she began slowly, "Miss Hardbroom sent me to see you because I made the wrong potion again." The smile faded from the headmistress's face, and she sighed as if it was a disappointment. Mildred felt about half an inch high. "Really, Mildred," Miss Cackle said in a tired voice, "I've run out of things to say to you. Week by week you come here, sent by every member of staff in the school, and my words seem to go straight in one ear and out the other. You will never get the witch's higher certificate. It is appalling if this appalling conduct continues. You must be the worst witch in this entire school. Whenever there's any trouble, you are always nearly found to be at the bottom of it. And it's just not good enough, my dear. Now what have you got to say for yourself this time?" "I really don't know, Miss Cackle," Mildred said, humbly. "Everything I do just seems to go wrong. That's all. I mean to do it. I don't mean to do it." "Well, there's no excuse, is it?" said Miss Cackle. "Everyone else manages to live without causing an uproar wherever they go. You must pull yourself together, Mildred. I don't want to hear any more bad reports about you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Miss Cackle," said Mildred in a sorry voice as she could manage. "Run along, then," said the headmistress, "and remember what I've said to you." Maud was waiting at the door, eager to know what had been said, when her friend came out of the office. "She's really nice," Mildred said. "Just told me all the usual things. She hates telling people off. I'll have to try and be better from now on. Come on, let's go and have the kitten." It's another broomstick lesson. Chapter 5. The following morning, Miss Hardbroom strode into the classroom, looking very thoughtful. She was wearing a new grey and black striped dress, with a brooch to the shoulder. "Good morning, girls," she greeted them, not as sharply as usual. "Good morning, Miss Hardbroom," chorused the girls. Their form mistress arranged the books on her desk and surveyed the class. "I have something to tell you, girls," she began, "that gives me great pleasure on one hand, yet causes me some worry on the other." Here she shot a glance at Mildred. "As you know, the Halloween celebrations take place in 2 weeks' time, and it is customary for a display to be presented by the school. This year, our class has been chosen to present this display." There were gasps and delight from the girls. "Of course," Miss Hardbroom went on. "It's a great honour, but also a great responsibility. as Miss Cackle's academy has the very high reputation, which we don't want to spoil, do we? Last year, Form 3 produced its play, which was highly praised, and I thought that this year we might present a broomstick formation team. You will need a lot of practice, and some of you are not too steady on your broomsticks yet, but I am quite certain that we could give an interesting and successful performance. Is there anyone who would prefer something different? She looked around piercingly at all the girls, who all shrank in their seats, and would not have dared to disagree even if they had wanted to. Good, said Miss Hardbroom. Then it's settled. We shall present a broomstick formation team. Let us go down to the yard and begin practice at once. Fetch your broomsticks, and be outside in 2 minutes. With which words she vanished. The girls excitedly clattered to their rooms and rushed along the corridors to fetch the broomsticks, which were kept in their own rooms. The spiral staircase rang with the sound of hobnob boots, and the girls rushed down to the yard, where they found Miss Hardbroom waiting for them. First off, you'd better take a practice flight, she said. Form an orderly crocodile and go round the school and back. And off they flew in an orderly but rather wobbly progression round the school. Quite good, girls, said Miss Hardbroom as they lined up in front of her. You all did quite well. You all swaying about rather badly, Mildred, but apart from that, you all did quite well. Now, I have made out a list of things that we'll be doing. First, a single line, with each pupil sinking and rising alternately. This should be comparatively easy. Second, a flying V, similar to wild geese in flight. Then, nose-diving in the yard and swooping up just before you reach the ground. That will be the most difficult part of all. Mildred and Marge exchanged horrified glances. And finally, you will form a circle in the air, each broomstick touching the next. Any questions? No. Well, very well then. We shall begin the first item immediately. What was the first item, Mildred? Nose-diving the yard, Miss Hardbroom. Wrong! Ethel, do you remember? We are to form a line, each pupil sinking and rising alternatively, replied Ethel, word perfect as always. Correct, said Miss Hardbroom, with a frosty glare at Mildred. We shall practice this in the morning and every morning until celebrations, and perhaps this afternoon, if I can persuade Miss Bat to allow you to miss your chanting lessons. They worked very hard for the next 2 weeks. Every spare minute was spent practicing, and by the time Halloween arrived, the display was quite a joy to watch. Maud's hat was squashed like a concerta from the time when she had not been pulled up from nosedive during practice. But apart from that, there had been hardly any trouble at all, even from Mildred, who was making a special effort to be good and thoughtful. The day before Halloween, Miss Hardbroom lined up her class in the yard to give them a few final words of advice. I am very pleased with you girls, she said almost pleasantly. Now, you will be wearing your best robes tomorrow, so I hope they will be clean and pressed. As she said this, she caught sight of Mildred's broomstick. Mildred, why is there a bundle of sticky tape in the middle of your broomstick? I'm afraid it broke in half during the first week of term, admitted Mildred. Ethel giggled. I see, said Miss Hardbroom. Well, you certainly can't use that one in the display. Ethel, I seem to remember you have a spare one. Perhaps you could lend it to Mildred. Oh, Miss Hardbroom, cried Ethel. It was given to me as a birthday present. I shouldn't want anything to happen to it. Miss Hardbroom fixed Ethel with one of her nastiest looks. Oh, if that's how you feel, Ethel, she said in icy tones, then... Oh, I didn't mean I wouldn't lend it, Miss Hardbroom, Ethel said meekly. I'll go and fetch it now. And she ran into the school. Ethel had never forgotten the time that Mildred turned her into a pig, and as she made her way up the spiral staircase, she suddenly thought of a marvellous way to take her revenge. Ethel really wasn't a nice person at all. I'll fix you, Mildred Hubble, she cackled to herself as she took the broomstick out of a cupboard. Now listen to me, Broom, this is very important. The class had dismissed when Ethel returned carrying the broomstick. Mildred was practicing nose-diving by the yard. Here's the broom, Mildred, called Ethel. I'll leave it propped against the wall. Thanks very much, replied Mildred, delighted that Ethel was being so nice, for the two hadn't spoken since the pig episode. It's very kind of you. Not at all, said Ethel, smiling wickedly to herself, as she went back into the school.